welcome back. As I said before lunch, we've been steadily widening the lens out, and we now are going to spend the next couple of hours talking about interventions in international crises. First, humanitarian aid, Lynn Jones, and then later we'll be talking specifically about children and war, conflict, and refugee situations. Again, Karen is going to lead us through this conversation and moderate it. I will just say about Lynn Jones that the last time we did a program on this theme, Lynn could participate only by Skype. And even by Skype, as the big face on the screen, she was completely compelling. So take it away, Karen.
Yes, we were so excited when we were going to see her in the flesh and hear her in the flesh. So Lynn Jones wears a number of hats when it comes to trauma and childhood development. She's a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a writer, a researcher, a relief worker. For almost 30 years, she's run mental health services in disaster and conflict settings. She's also been a peace activist. So she understands the effects of trauma on children from both intimate experience and thoughtful analysis. For all her humanitarian work, she was made an officer of the British Empire. She's originally from England and has worked in such places as Bosnia, Somalia, Guatemala, and now Belize. Lucky for us, she put much of her experience and expertise in a compelling new book called Outside the Asylum, which you all got copies of, and I highly recommend. Her memoir not only looks at disaster zones from the perspective of one hardworking doctor and relief worker, but it explores the way the international aid community has attempted to address problems in these chaotic places, and not always in the most effective ways. She's become an expert of sorts, I would say, in unintended consequences, some of which she'll be addressing today. So please welcome Lynn Jones.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and actually to get to hear so many people who've influenced my career and who I cite in when I do occasionally write academic papers. And so I was really, really pleased to be invited. I'm going to talk for about 35 minutes. I'm going to read a little bit and talk a bit and break it up just to give you something different. It's totally different to what we've been doing earlier, so I hope you'll forgive the change of tone. But I hope also that you won't feel when we come to discussing that you will discuss and comment, not just feel you have to ask me questions. I'm going to be asking you questions to which I don't have answers. So I hope you can help. So I'll start here with my rules for disasters, because I've made some. If you're unfortunate enough to be a victim of a disaster, here are some do's and don'ts for gaining maximum attention and assistance. Timing is very important. Don't have your disaster just after one in a very rich first world country. Don't have it just before Christmas, people are too busy shopping. Have it on Christmas Day. Boxing Day is even better if you can manage it, when everyone is exhausted by present giving, feeling overfed, watching TV, and wishing they could do something constructive, especially if it does not involve physical effort. Location. It is best to have your disaster close to a beach. This ensures attractive locations for both media and aid workers looking for a nice place to work. Avoid chilly, mountainous regions with severe deforestation, bad urban planning, and poor internet connections. Victimhood. Avoid being black. Try not to be old. Any age under 10 is excellent. Do not live in a state with Sharia law or any association with terrorism. Nice Muslims in lacy white headgear are acceptable, but Buddhists and other religions that have monks and flowers are preferred. Nature of disaster. Do pick something catastrophic and unusual, preferably something that has not happened before. Tsunamis are good, although they might be passé now. Earthquakes, it depends. Floods and sinking ferries, long-running wars, forget it. Numbers of dead. This is much less important than you might think. More may sometimes be better, but will always be trumped by the other factors listed above. This was my opening to an article about the Pakistan earthquake in 2005, written for a glossy American women's magazine. My editor loved it, and it was included in the page proofs. The editor-in-chief did not. She cut the section from the article. She sent a message to us both. Our women readers will not appreciate the irony and will feel insulted. There was no argument. She was on a yoga retreat in Colorado and not taking incoming calls or messages from anyone. I wrote it while I was living in the northwest frontier province of Pakistan in December 2005. An earthquake of magnitude 7.6 had just killed 78,000 people, and I was a very long way from a beach. Balakot had been reduced to rubble, along with hundreds of remote surrounding communities. Winter had begun in earnest, and 1.9 million people were living in 300,000 canvas tents in the hills and mountains around us. Houses that had withstood the earthquake collapsed under 50 centimeters of snow. So I thought I'd start there. But as you know, that's a disaster. And actually, the thing that's taken most of my time has been these long-running and rather neglected wars. This is Dhafir. Who remembers Dhafir these days? It's still continuing, in case you were wondering. But it had a profound effect on me because when I was working there, I was there looking for mentally ill people, which I do. I work with severely mentally ill, and I'll come to that. And that's been, for me, the kind of focus of my work, to seek out those with severe mental disorders, not PTSD, but chronic schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, who thinks about those in disasters. And I was told that I should find this woman because she was ranting and raving and had left her baby under a hedge. We found her. We had to sort of tramp around these bits of plastic and whatever. And she was indeed ranting and raving. She was delirious, and she was delirious because she was starving. And when we gave her some food and she was able to calm down, able to talk to her, she said she was leaving her baby under a hedge, thorn bush, because the baby was dying and there was no point in doing any more. So we somehow got mother and baby together, and we took her to a therapeutic feeding center. We don't have so many of those now, but we did then. And we fed both baby and mother. And there was a profound effect, this is before, this is after, on the relationship. Yes, food can bring mother and baby together. But the place had an effect on me as well, because when I looked around, I just saw all these mothers and babies. Like, it was silent. There wasn't a crying and whimpering, but there wasn't any interaction. And I thought, we should do something about this. And I thought, I better start reading. And guess who I read? She's sitting in the room. Where's she gone? Sally. There you are. I started, thank goodness, The Lancet had just produced its first series, and WHO had just produced guidelines on how to stimulate infants, and a critical link, which was a wonderful document. And UNICEF was around, and a year later, they gave me money to do a controlled trial, the only one I've ever done, in northern Uganda, on what happens if you do an emergency intervention to try and get mothers in emergency situations to play with their babies. And it's the only time, I have a 6-week intervention, which I'm still doing in Belize. You don't just have to do it in emergencies. But what I began with, and what I always begin with, is at least 2 or 3 months of intensive qualitative research. Yes, qualitative research, we haven't talked about that much. I'm an anthropologist by training. I did anthropology before medicine. And I really do think sitting down and talking to people and listening to what they have to say teaches you a lot. For example, this mother I've got up here, who just told me, I don't tell stories, I don't play with my child, I don't have in my head to play, and when I do play, it looks awkward, which is very interesting. Acholi mothers don't actually play very much with their babies and don't talk much to their babies. So there were some cultural factors I had to understand as well. There was also the effects of life in these massive IDP camps. Fathers were drinking massively, and this led us to an alcohol intervention as well, and using the money that was available from the homebrew that women were making in order to make an income, they were drinking that. So they were very disengaged. So we started a very simple ECD program, which had a slogan. The word love was central, and I show this picture because the point of the program was using a lovely video that Sally helped make, teach mothers to make toys, teach mothers to play. They love that video, Sally. They love that video. I'm still using it. You know, the WHO video of Jamaican work. And I left having taught mothers to make toys. I did not teach them to make this one. I came back the next morning to the stabilization center, and this mother had made her own toy, which was a plastic bottle cut up. I came back the next day, and every mother had one of these hanging above her bed. It was just magic. This kind of work is infectious. So we have love, play, communicate. And guess what? The other thing is, we learn a lot too. This mother taught me how they have children on their feet before 5 months, the developmentally expected age. How? Because you put them in this pot, You wrap lots of towels around them, and then one by one you take the towels away and the baby can sit and support themselves, and then they're getting on their feet quicker. It's amazing. So we've replicated the program. I did it on the Somali border. Lots of play. I haven't been in Somalia, by the way. I've only been on the border. But there's a problem, you know. There's a problem that I'm going to recognize, which is that places like this, these are kind of homemade refugee camps, they don't get a lot of money. And just to give you the figures, for example, this camp, I was in my 3rd year and I wanted $250,000 to continue for 1 more year of training mothers. And I couldn't get $250,000 for a 6-month program. Meanwhile, I was responsible for, because my position made me responsible for global programs, 3 programs in the Middle East for Iraqi refugees. This was 2008-9, and I could get $5 million just like that to help urban mothers, and they were very deserving, but the needs were nothing compared to this, in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, to do this kind of programming. But I couldn't get money for the Somali border. Now, why would that be? Why today do we have no money for South Sudan and Yemen? But we do have money for other places. I can't answer those questions. Perhaps you can. Could get money for here. This is 2010, and I'd like to read you another little short section just to give you a feeling. So this is Haiti after the earthquake. I'm back inside the asylum, standing in the men's courtyard at the Mars and Klein Psychiatric Hospital in the center of town. Hot sun beats down on concrete. There's a crevasse in the middle caused by the earthquake. A dirty, naked man lies beside it eating rice from a bowl. Another naked man sits rocking in the shade. The sleeping areas are filthy, with bare iron bedsteads, a few pieces of torn clothing, and nothing else. There are 2 tiny barred cells, both occupied by bearded, ragged-haired, naked, sad-faced men who stare at me through the bars. There's scarcely space to sit or lie down inside, and nothing to lie upon. Dirt and graffiti cover the walls, and they stink of feces. There's no working toilet or shower in the hospital, just a bucket in the yard. You wouldn't cage an animal like this. It's completely unbearable. Luckily, most of the 60 patients were evacuated to their families when the quake struck, but 11 have come back. The administrator showed me round, and he can see my distress, and I can see his embarrassment. He talks vaguely of government plans for renovation that came to nothing. What did I expect? Haiti's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. The hospital is Haiti's only mental health facility. The administrator tells me there's nothing else, no regional units, no community care. They have an outpatient population of 10,000 in normal times. Right now, 2 doctors who are sleeping on pavements because their own houses collapsed are seeing 150 patients a day in the yard. I'm ashamed of myself. What do you need? I asked the administrator. The answer is the familiar one: mattresses, sheets, clothes for the patients and staff, buckets, cleaning materials, generator, functioning toilets, tents for the staff to sleep in, a vehicle to get us work, medication. The day I arrived, Dino, our director of emergencies, said, give me a list of what you need and you can have it. We have the money. This is because Haiti has followed all my how to make your disaster noticeable and profitable rules. This is not the Karakoram Mountains. The epicenter of this earthquake is 10 miles from Port-au-Prince, a capital city where some 3 million people live. Hop, skip and jump from one of the richest countries in the world. The numbers are mind-boggling. In 35 seconds, it killed more than 200,000, injured 300,000, made 1.5 million people homeless, and destroyed the government ministries and presidential palace. The UN calls it the most destructive urban disaster in recent history. And the timing is perfect, just after Christmas. The population is definitively non-Muslim, and there is still nice access to beaches in every direction. CNN have taken every room at the only structurally sound hotel with a swimming pool. The New York Times are following me about and promising to do a story on people with severe mental disorders. The paradox is that in the midst of all this devastation, sleeping in a tent in a concrete yard, kept awake by the snoring of colleagues in the next tent, sharing a bathroom with minimal water pressure, with 16 other people who never declog the plug hole, and eating our logistician's idea of a good diet, which seems to consist totally of cheesy Wotsits and bottled water, I'm happy. I feel useful. There's something I can do and the money to do it. And that's the dirty secret. Everyone loves a good emergency. Not the tiresome kind that goes on for years and years in obscure, dusty places that no one has ever heard of, where it's so difficult to really know who are the good guys and who are the bad. Accident and Emergency is now reality TV. Can someone name a prime-time television program made about any chronic illness? Never mind one about chronic schizophrenia. Anyway, we did set up a mental health program, and I'm very happy to say that we'd set up baby tents. This is my first experience with baby tents. you all know about child-friendly spaces. If you don't, we can discuss them later. But child-friendly spaces are in every emergency I've ever been to. And there were 60 agencies doing child-friendly spaces in Haiti in the psychosocial cluster. But nobody was doing anything for children under 3. And so World Vision and Save the Children and IMC, who I work for, said, look, we want a space where there are no 3-year-olds or over, because they run around and they get dirty and they scream and shout. We want a baby tent. And we got them. And this is me training lovely Haitian kindergarten teachers in the same intervention that I was doing in other places. We made them clean, we had a breastfeeding space, and we did lots of love, play, communicate. Now the thing is, and I'm going to read you a little bit more, that there's always a stage in emergencies where you actually have to move on. And you move from relief and emergency to building back better, okay? Because the idea is, especially in a place like Haiti, you don't just go in and respond, but you make things better. And of course, early child development fits beautifully into that, because you're building on the building blocks of children's brains and trying to help. The trouble is with that, it raises lots of really awkward questions, like, are you actually building what people are asking you for? And I'll give you an example that I think fits with this morning's discussion. For example, how should we respond to the request to rebuild orphanages? There were at least 600 in the country, with some 50,000 children living in them. Although most of these orphans had at least one living parent whom they visited regularly. UNICEF had assessed more than 250 of the institutions and found that they lacked drinkable water, functioning latrines, and the children were malnourished, and infectious diseases were rife. Madame Simone showed me round one that she had set up with her husband in a large villa in Port-au-Prince. She had become upset about the abandoned children in the neighbourhood and taken them in. Then more and more parents had begged her to take their children. 15 lived there now, and another 20 attended her school. She chatted away as we climbed the steep, unbanistered stairs and looked into one of the unpainted and dilapidated bedrooms. All the children share beds, Madam explained apologetically, or they sleep on the floor. 2 very small boys, one about 2 years old and the other 4, sat on one of the beds. They were dressed in greying, torn underwear and looked unwell. Their mother gave them over to me 5 days ago. Her house was destroyed in the earthquake, and she doesn't want them anymore. We went to the police and signed the paper. It's all legal. We continued walking round. All the paintwork was cracked and dirty, the toilet waterless and full of feces. But the older children didn't seem unhappy, playing and joshing with one another. Out in the yard, next to an empty kitchen shed, 3 more children crouched, unsupervised, round an open fire. We gave Madame the 2 portable covered stoves we'd brought with us. She thanked us, but what she wanted, she said, was money to build a bigger and better orphanage. So did the woman looking after 20 children living under canvas beside an avalanche of rubble where 9 bodies were still buried, and the couple with some 15 children sleeping on mats in a car park and cooking in a stairwell. All the children told us calmly that they were beaten when they misbehaved. They thought it was normal. What was to be done? They were desperately understaffed. Department of Social Welfare completely lacked the resources to check on conditions. There were concerns about child exploitation, abuse and trafficking. Americans had already been arrested for trying to smuggle children over the border. UNICEF and all the agencies involved in child protection were totally opposed to the building of new orphanages. They wanted to reunite the children with their families or arrange adoption or fostering within Haiti. They argued that if we improved conditions in the old institutions, as their owners requested, such orphanages would continue to offer an attractive solution to homeless and impoverished parents, weighed down by the burdens of childcare. Yet lifting families to a living standard where they were not tempted to give away their children in order to improve their life chances would require massive social change. I didn't think we could leave children in punitive and inhumane living conditions while we worked for deinstitutionalization. I asked for money to deliver food supplements, to do some necessary temporary repairs, and provide staff training in physical and emotional care. I got the funds. We were allowed to build back, but not to make it too much better. Well, after Haiti, which in many ways was a disaster and continues to be so with cholera to this day, we can go into that later, I decided that the real emergency was poverty and that actually I should stop doing relief work and try and be serious and work in an impoverished situation. So I accepted a job to design and establish my ECD model in northern Mozambique. Which was lovely, and you hear absolutely lovely mother and baby, and mothers and babies were absolutely delightful. And I was very happy there. I got 3 months to do my qualitative assessment at the beginning, and I learned a lot. You know, for example, it was really good to sit down, and I worry about many interventions that don't do this anthropological work first. And the ECD program had been running before I arrived, and they'd never gone out and asked mothers the kind of basics, like, what do you think about your child when it's born? What are the rituals? What developmental steps do you expect? So I learned that these mothers, Kimwani mothers in the north, do not expect babies to talk or speak before, because they don't think babies can either see or hear for the first 8 weeks of life. Now, what does that mean for a stimulation program if you don't think your baby can see or hear, all right? So you have a fundamental issue there to address. And they also have a marvelous technique, doesn't work, for encouraging speech in speech-delayed child, which is to take a key and put it near or in the mouth and turn it. So you've got to find out about this stuff. And I love finding out about it, and I love working with these mothers and babies. And so I was very happy doing that. This is one of the groups we set up on one of the islands. And it was very, Sally was talking about small groups. I love doing small groups because they bring mothers together. You can deal with all sorts of other issues like domestic violence. They don't treat depression, but our initial study in Uganda showed that they do improve maternal mood because you're sitting chatting about your baby with other mums, so that's great. And we put a lot of this stuff later into UNICEF guidelines, which I'm very proud that we wrote. But then again, you have, even in developing contexts, the issue of how is aid delivered. And I've got one other, I'm okay for time, aren't I? Yes?
Yeah, I think you have
I'm fine.
10 more minutes or so. Yeah.
I'd hoped that shifting to development, I could get rid of the feeling of us and them that I'd felt so strongly in Haiti. But if anything, it was more entrenched. Us being the professionals, both Mozambicans and internationals who had jobs, them being the beneficiaries, the subsistence farmers on whose behalf we were working, but who we were so wary to consult. We sat in our offices in Pemba, designed programs and budgets, wrote grant proposals and reports, sallied forth in our four-wheel drives to villages scattered through the forests that stretched in every direction to do trainings and supervise. They sat in the trainings, half asleep because many of them were delivered in Portuguese, which they didn't understand. The worst thing for me was that the programs themselves were delivered by volunteers who were responsible for actually doing it but were not paid anything. Take the preschool program. It had funding for preschools, playgrounds to be built. We visited some in my first days. In each small village, we found a newly built preschool with cane walls and thatch roof, swings, climbing frames, and delightful infants. In some of them sang songs, played games, and learnt their alphabets. But many were empty. The facilitators accompanying us lamented. The volunteer teachers were all subsistence farmers, they explained, who worked every day with handheld hoes in the hot sun to feed their families. How could the facilitators insist they put this work aside and run the preschool for free? I tried discussing this issue a few weeks later. We were brainstorming how to respond to a call from the World Bank. They would be dishing out large sums of money for nutrition programs. The government would get the money and would be looking for partners to do the work. My agency was in with chance. We were told to ready ourselves. I was invited to a discussion to consider a psychosocial component for the project. 20 of us crowded into a small meeting room. We had a technical expert visiting from Geneva. Our senior health advisor had flown up, especially from Maputo, to present the ministry view. The plan appeared to involve at least 4 levels of paid government bureaucrat. But the actual job of helping mothers in the community towards a better grasp of nutrition and child development and better fed babies ultimately depended on an NGO partner, hopefully us, training volunteer community activists to train the mothers. These would be the same community activists we train to run preschools or do health education, who already work approximately 8 hours a week for nothing, trekking all over their communities, giving up time from their subsistence farms without a bicycle to ride or T-shirt to say who they are. The health advisor nod. Well, where will they find the time for this additional work, I asked. Silence. Why can't they be paid for it? How would the pay be sustained? We would create an expectation. So here we are again. Well-paid, well-suited government bureaucrats and NGO staff living happy lives on beaches, me, will drive into some of the poorest communities in the world and ask subsistence farmers to volunteer to improve the lives of their neighbours for nothing. And if they say, please could I be paid, we reply, well, even if we could find a short-term salary from some donor, there's no guarantee that we could continue it. And so you'd get something at the start, but it might not continue, and that would apparently be worse than not getting anything at all. And what we're really trying to create here is a republic of virtue where we are paid good salaries and given big cars to come and train you to work for nothing at all. I knew I was being over-emotional. This outburst was met with another silence. Well, we could ask the community to think how they could compensate the volunteers, someone said. People used to volunteer all the time under socialism. Great, I said, the cooperative communist dream, except the government here gave up on socialism a while back, and you may have noticed that right now they're all into private enterprise and individual profit and making money from natural gas off the Carimbas. If they want village cooperatives again, perhaps they should come and join them and model free cooperative labor themselves. Look, said our senior advisor, the Ministry of Health says, don't pay volunteers. Yes, and many NGOs simply lie and say they don't, but then they do, and then people won't work with us, Angelo interjected. He was a local health coordinator, a doctor who shared my concerns. Well, I'm on the side of the liars, except I think all the NGOs should get together and confront the government on the exploitation of the poorest members of their community. Volunteering happens when you have enough and you want to share and give back, not when you have nothing and are struggling to survive. And can someone tell me why a professional job like preschool teaching should be done as a voluntary favor? So the schools close when the infants arrive because the teacher is unpaid and has to pick mangoes today? I don't think we should be applying for funding that locks us into exploiting people in this way. At home in Britain, my sister-in-law is a professional preschool teacher and gets a salary. But if you do give them money, they'll just drink it. If we give them anything, it should be something they need and is worthwhile, someone else chips in. Oh, absolutely. The feckless and ignorant poor. What can we do with them? Certainly we cannot risk giving them the cash. I knew it was time I shut up. I did. And the discussion progressed as if I hadn't spoken. If there's one golden rule for most NGOs, it's run after the money or die. So let me go back to Haiti and ask this question. This is a camp where it was next to the UN cluster system, where this man, Christopher, lived for a year. He's a Spanish school teacher, middle-class professional. His house was knocked down by the earthquake, and the school where he taught was destroyed and never rebuilt. And I put this picture up because I met him last year when I was running ECD programs in Tijuana in Mexico for Haitians who had been trekked. He had trekked. So his story is that he left Haiti giving up on us building back better a year after the earthquake. He went to Brazil and he managed to get a job as a car welder for 2 years, and he was happy because he could support his family, but then the Brazilian economy collapsed. And so he moved north, dragging over mountains, a terrible journey through Colombia, through Panama. It's a nightmare to describe. Ending up in Tijuana, unfortunately, just after the beginning of November when Trump had been elected and changed the rules for Haitians in the United States. As you know, they can now all be sent automatically back to Haiti. So he decided he would stay in Mexico, which was amazing because the Mexicans are being absolutely, especially in Tijuana, absolutely amazing welcome to the Haitians. The only problem being is that there's nowhere to live. So for the 6 months before I turned up, and still now I believe, his wife and his child sleep in this bed in a church shelter, and he has the room next door where he slimly sleeps with 10 men. But he was still translating for me, translating for the New York Times, helping me run the ECD group that we ran last summer. This is us building back better. He's just one of these 68.5 million forcibly displaced people, and yes, I am coming to the end now. I've got another 10 minutes, that's right. I'm shifting gear now because I want to talk about this crisis now, because I feel in many ways, not that I've contributed to it by my failures in places like Mozambique and Haiti, but I certainly haven't made things better. And I think we are, all of us now, on the front line of the most extraordinary struggle of our lives. If I ask this question in a non-international audience, 2/3 will put up their room, but of course I remember that most of you are from all over the world and probably not migrants. But when I teach in America or Europe and I ask people to put up their hands, most people in the room are the children or grandchildren of migrants. And I certainly am myself. My grandfather was a Jewish Austrian refugee. He wasn't a refugee, he was an economic migrant. He moved in the 20s, knowing what was coming. He moved in the 20s from Austria to England, and luckily, as a consequence, I'm here today. Otherwise, I wouldn't be. I think this quote is pertinent. It starts with refugees, but refugees are just the barometer of what is going to happen to all of us. They were welcomed nowhere, could be assimilated nowhere. Once they'd left their homeland, they remained homeless. Once they'd left their state, they remained stateless. Once they'd been deprived of their human rights, they were rightless, the scum of the earth. We have got to do better. And what puts me to shame is that the people who are doing better are people like this in Mexico, in Lebanon, where a quarter of the population is refugees, in Uganda, where if you're a refugee, you're allowed to work, you're allowed to travel. It's in Europe and the United States, the so-called beacons of democracy and enlightenment, that we are getting it wrong. We didn't always get it wrong. I'm proud to say that one of my friends here in the audience today is an asylum seeker who's arrived in the United States from Kosovo, built a life here, pays taxes. Thank you, Marley, for coming. He's a contemporary of this young woman. 19 members of her family were gunned down like this. She survived, and we picked her up, literally picked her up, and took her to Britain, healed the physical wounds, and worked with her and her 3 or 4. Emma, did you introduce me? Emma, I've just forgotten, my God. Emma was a journalist who said, you've got to come and see these girls that I found in hospital. I just suddenly remembered that. Anyway, the point is, she is an asylum seeker who got refuge in Britain, along with all the 5 surviving children and the 2 fathers who survived. Where is she now? She is the head of culture and sport in Pristina municipality. She is running things in her town. This is what happens if you give people asylum. Let me come to a younger story. I have a website, it's on the material about me, where I put the stories of migrant children. And this boy, I want to bring him up because it also brings up the child labor questions that we were discussing. But his story is quite extraordinary. He, at 7 years old, crossed the Somali border by himself. He lost his family. And he was completely alone. And he arrived in Jijiga, very near where I was working. We worked out we were there in the same year, but we didn't meet. And this is what he did. Some people say they want shoe cleaning. So I see one man with a car, and I say, I want to help. And the man says, okay, and gives me some water, and I clean his car, and he gives me some money, and I go to a shop and buy some stuff to clean shoes. When people have seen what I have seen, it makes you older than your age. He's 7. Because I was small, I didn't have a mother or father. I had to be my own mother and father. And I went to the market, and I found people who could help. So every day I was in the market, cleaning shoes and cleaning cars all day. He got 3 jobs. 2 friends turned up. He gave his jobs to them. He got a house. He told me he got a house. A house in Jijiga is something like that. But it was a house which he shared with 3 friends. But come age 13, the conflict has spilled over. He decides he has to head for Europe. And I was writing about, this is 2 years ago, what's been going on in Libya has been going on for years. He was kidnapped, put in one of these horrible camps in Libya, and it was extortion. A man on a phone saying, call your family to send money, and they start beating you. So your family knows it's going badly. We told him, we don't have money, we don't have people to send money. And he said, if you don't have money, I'll kill you. So we told him, we don't have money, so kill us. And we didn't have a place to go to the toilet, nowhere to shit. It was like prison. But he finally reaches his mother, and he dramatized for me how his mother went in the marketplace and begged for food and money. She sent the money to him. He managed to pay, and then by then he had bad TB and he was dying. So the smugglers and people said, oh, throw the boy on a boat, he's going to die anyway. He threw on a boat, and he managed to reach, thank you, he managed to reach Italy. He was doing really well in Italy, but we didn't ask him what he wanted. We didn't ask him what he needed. We sent him to school in Italy, and what he wanted was to send money to his mother and his brother, his mother and sister in Somalia. So he ran away from the school and the lovely community home I went in order to earn money. I don't know what the rights and wrongs of that, but we have to ask children what they need and want. Can I take 2 more minutes, I know I'm 1 minute up, to read the final thing? Because I want to contrast his story and her story with this last page of my book, which is a third what will happen to us if we don't look after child refugees. Do you know about the jungle in Calais? I don't have to explain that to you. Where a lot of child refugees were living until we evicted them all. This is just the voice of one of them, and this is the end of my talk. What happens if we continue to lock ourselves in our fortress? I get talking to Tawab, one of the boys helping out at a restaurant. He's 19, he left Afghanistan when he was 10. His parents were killed when the Taliban bombed his village. He ran away to avoid recruitment by them. After 9 years of wandering around Europe, including 14 months in a camp in Italy, getting to the UK once, being deported, spending 3 months in a French detention centre, he asked the French government to help him back to Afghanistan. I want to go back and help my country. I don't care about money. I don't care about Europe. I didn't see any human rights here. And when I get home, I will ask for 10 minutes on Afghan TV, and I will tell them what I experienced here. And I will say, yes, there are some good people, but when Americans and British come to our country without passports and with guns, we should kill them. He sees the shock on my face. You don't know human rights, but you teach them in Afghanistan. Why do you think I left Afghanistan? Because if I had not, they would have forced me to join a group. It was the only way to survive. There are no human rights there. The government fucks people up. It's impossible to be a normal person in Afghanistan. The Taliban's everywhere, and now we have ISIL. In Italy, I was in a camp for 14 months. But what can I do with asylum in Italy when there's no work, no housing, no benefits? And yes, I know it's the same in the UK. I know that now. That's why I'm going back. And tell me this. How can you come and work in my country when I cannot work in yours? How can you come with a Kalashnikov and no passport when I'm not allowed in yours? Your soldier, he's born in England, he comes to my country, he walks my roads and mountains and villages with his Kalashnikov, and we give him tea, we give him everything. I don't have a Kalashnikov, I'm not like you, I'm just a donkey. Afghan, Iraqi, Syrian, we're all kicked. You see me as a dog, but I'm a human being, and all humans are the same. We understand the law just like you, we don't break laws. So now when I get home, I will go on TV and tell people, when you get to Europe, they fuck you up, they beat you and put you in prison. They hate you. So if they come here, you have to kill them. Sitting in the mud in Calais, I finally realize I am the one in the madhouse. This asylum looks a bit like my lovely home in Haiti in its flowery guarded compound, except it's called Northern Europe. And outside the gates, half the world is clamoring to come in. The jungle confronts us with a question. We have one planet. Will we share its resources equitably and take care of it together? Or will those of us with more firepower build ever higher fences to try and protect ourselves from those marauding swarms trying to escape the poverty, violence, and injustice that we are complicit in creating? The recent bombings in Paris show there are no fences high enough. On the contrary, Tawwab's despair suggests that by rejecting those fleeing terror and seeking democracy, we foster the very thing we fear. We can delude ourselves that this global flight has nothing to do with the centuries of exploitation and theft through which we've enriched ourselves. Our high consumption, high carbon exuding lifestyle and our endless demand for growth have no relation to the expanding deserts in sub-Saharan Africa. And that the neoliberal structural adjustment policies imposed on all for the last 30 years are making everything better for everyone rather than enriching a few while impoverishing many. The fundamental issue is not who we let in or who we keep out, but whether those of us who have more than we need will share with those who have less wherever they live. We can choose between Sadiq, Saranda, or Tawwab. The choice is up to us. Thank you very much.
Well, that was very meaningful. we have about 20 minutes.
Yes, please, and don't feel you have to ask a question. I mean, please, I'm very happy to hear what people have to say.
Okay, you heard her. I'm going to sort of ask a question just to start it out, just because you're somewhat outspoken in the community of aid workers, I've noticed. And I was really struck by reading parts of your memoir and hearing you talk of how entrenched the aid community seems to be with what they've been doing all along, and how outspoken you seem to be in what works and what doesn't work. And how does the tension that must come out of that with you and the rest of the aid community, how does that make your job easier or harder? Does it give you sort of more of a sense of agency to be able to say what you think against this pretty entrenched community, or does it make it harder to get stuff done?
Well, I'm pretty marginal. I'm not in. I left my most high-powered position, which was a sort of, it's lovely, they called me the senior mental health advisor. I didn't have any junior staff, but anyway, I left that position after 10 years, not resentfully, but there's also the management principle. You stop doing the clinical work you enjoy and you're managing 20 programs and writing funding proposals. And I, A, missed the clinical work, and B, found in writing this book, which I was lucky to have a fellowship at Harvard at the time, and thinking about it, I didn't want to work like that. So then I tried working in Mozambique, which I've told you about, and as you see, I was pretty outspoken there and didn't get on very well with the organization who were employing me as a consequence. And then I decided there were personal issues, I had to be at home, my mother, family issues, but I decided I wanted to practice what I preached, which meant looking for a completely different way of working, which is what I'm doing now, which has made me very marginal, which is fine. I mean, I can write articles and I wouldn't say that I was in any way, I don't think the aid community are aware of my existence. I work for a tiny charity. I work for nothing. Now, of course, I'm privileged to do that in one degree because I have a pension from my NHS job, a small one, and I can get some rent from the house that I'm not living in the UK. My husband and I thought that we wanted to work for a small charity where volunteer young doctors, medical PAs and nurses come for a month at a time, and they pay to work for this charity. They deliver the medical services, and their money pays for the charity, which provides free medical care across southern Belize in these mobile clinics. And the model is really important to me because it's actually us giving financial and medical support. So, and we're very small, and I and my husband work for nothing, and they give us free housing. And I wanted to learn about how that worked, and I'm happy to learn about it and possibly replicate it. And I think small is beautiful. And the more of us who do that, the better. I also think, and there's whole stuff that I haven't read, that it's impossible to be neutral. Independent, yes, but in today's world, if we, the charitable sector, do not speak out about the rise of fascism, and there will be more genocide, and it won't be in distant places. And so we have to resist. I, with great respect to whoever's speaking tomorrow morning, will probably go on a demonstration. I think that we should take every opportunity to resist personally in our own lives, not just by giving money, but by speaking out and refusing to compromise, because you've got to draw a line. You've got to draw a line.
Okay. Anyone have a question for Lynn?
Silenced everybody, so. Yes.
No, I just want to share your angst about use of volunteers in Africa. Because I worked for a charity. I did a consultancy.
You mean the use of local people as volunteers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. I worked for a charity, and they paid me, this is a long time ago now, they paid me all my expenses, put me up in a hotel, and £400 a day for 10 days. And I was meant to put play in a village. When I got to the village, I found that they had 60% malnourished children. No services for nutrition of any type. The charity had trained, I think it was 10 community health aides. They were nearly all illiterate men, and it was a Muslim village. So what those aides were meant to be doing, I don't know. But they had trained 3 literate women, and I spoke to them, and they said they would work for £1 a day if they could get a job. So I said, okay, 2 of them said that they would work. I managed to get baby scales, a nutritionist who said they could get World Food Programme food coming into the village. And I got a businessman to volunteer like 10,000 quid. And I went back to the charity and I said, I'm not putting play in this village. They have no health, no nutrition care. It's ridiculous, you know. So they said, and I said, I've got this money. You can take this money. I've set it all up. And all I need is someone to administer the money, because corruption was very, very high. And I couldn't find a local person I could trust to pay these women their £1 a day. And the charity said to me, they couldn't pay the aides because it was not sustainable. But I said, but you're paying me £400 a day, and that's not sustainable. And if you can keep these children in this village not malnourished for 2 years, then you have a cohort of children who haven't been malnourished. That's sustainable.
I completely agree. Thank you for that.
In the end, I had to give the money back to the businessman because I could find no one to administer it. And I was not invited back.
Well, good for you, Sally.
Well, it wasn't good.
Over here, yeah.
Ma'am? Yeah.
Manish, yeah.
Ma'am?
Ma'am,
Do you think
Lynn,
after every tragedy, every crisis, there is a new crisis where we decide that this is a rich man's tragedy, this is a poor man's tragedy, and that is in the root cause of all the problems? And who are these people who takes the call that whether this is a rich man's tragedy, so let's get involved, it's a poor man's tragedy, so let's not get involved?
Is this a question to me, or is
Yeah,
this...
it's a question to you.
It doesn't. I don't know if it works quite like that, because what I see, and I actually, when I'm teaching more formally on this, I show a slide of Queensland floods and the same year as Pakistan floods, okay? And we got involved in Pakistan, we didn't go to Queensland, okay? Because there are UN structures and there's categories of emergencies, and it isn't, we're more likely to be, the UN is more likely to be called, and international aid is more likely to be called, as in the in poorer countries. Queensland and Christchurch, New Zealand aren't going to call the international community in when there's a disaster, because they do have the resources within the country to cope. So I'm not quite following your point. I do think we mishandle, especially in natural disasters, when a lot of money goes, because of the way the media work, money floods into natural disasters. And that's something for you to take note of as journalists. Why is it that I can't get money for Yemen, Somali border, and I can get money very fast in Aceh and Haiti and the Philippines? Because we love a big disaster. I'm sorry. Yeah. We love a big disaster. And I've tried to make that clear. So that's important. And the money then is too much money. And it gets wrongly spent. You know? So I don't think it's the issue of ignoring poor people. It's of not listening to them. Why is it that Christopher lives in a tent next to the UN compound to which he has no access and has no say? I need money to rebuild my school. And money goes for a private enterprise free trade zone that's part of Mr. Clinton's favorite project? Excuse me. I mean, I'm sorry, don't start me.
Too late. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I guess I have a question. I'm going to preface this by saying I left the U.S. when I was 3 and grew up in Kenya, and part of the reason I became a journalist is because I came back and I saw stories that didn't reflect what I had seen growing up in East Africa and also partially in the Caribbean. And I also did a lot of work in Haiti. I reported there for 4 years after the earthquake. And I guess the question is, how do we move beyond this narrative of these poor, naked, black children with flies around their mouths and living in poverty, because it's something that bothers me personally. I mean, the line that you gave where Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, when I started reporting there, that was in every single news report that I saw, that was up high. And I purposely tried to, I was reporting on rape and stories of children who'd been born as a result of rape. So the things that I was reporting on, they were difficult. But I tried to find Haitians who are helping Haitians. And I tried to find stories that didn't just paint this entire country or entire region as people who are living in abject poverty and can't help themselves. So I guess the question is for you and for anybody else here, how do we move beyond this? Because it's something that really, really irks me.
Well, one, this is the most politically controversial. I'm going to put it one because I used to put it at the bottom. I'm going to put it at the top. One, we have to stop talking about aid and start talking about reparations and start paying them now. Because Haiti is a classic example. Is it still paying reparations to France for giving up slavery or getting rid of slave owners? My own government only finished paying slave owners, I think like 7 or 8 years ago during the Cameron government, okay? We created the basis for most of the problems across many parts of the world by stealing people and selling them and enriching ourselves. Unless we address that issue, the poor countries where you live in the Caribbean, where people ended up but impoverished, or the countries from which they were stolen, will continue to suffer, and then we give them aid. Hello, we wrecked them in the first place. So my first is and Kofi Annan's raised it, many people in the UN have raised it, money is due, but who do you give it to? And here yes, there are corrupt governments, and just handing out money to governments isn't a way of giving money local. You know and I know how many amazing neighborhood and family associations there were that sprung up in Haiti. If we're going into these countries, we should be seeking out those organizations, and I've seen it in the migrant crisis. If you fund the small groups and you give them cash and you don't make them accountable, yes, we want you to do a log frame and show us how you evaluated your program and say, you need this money, here is £400, we'd like you to start an ECD program, whatever, do the best you can. Gosh, could we trust people to do that?
I think Lisa's also wondering, how do you, when you're covering this, especially us as journalists, is
I didn't answer the question, I'm sorry.
Well, this
Yeah.
is all important, of
Yeah.
course, but, you know, how do you manage to not paint everyone in those countries as a victim?
Well,
And-
by giving money, I mean, finding those groups and writing about them, showing what they're doing, and then asking, I would like them to say, and there was this discussion in Haiti, where, you know, why are we so poor? Because we're still excuse my language, we're still paying the French government for being so naughty as to liberate ourselves from slavery. I mean, excuse me. You know, that needs to be written about again, and people have written about, but that's what we should be looking at, the fundamental issues. The disaster is not the issue. Disasters happen, but the disaster, whether it's Grenfell Towers, the Guatemalan earthquake where the first paper was written on this issue, or Haiti, poverty is the issue. So in Haiti, you know that I could stay in a sunny, beautiful garden, a villa, which hadn't fallen down because the people who owned it were astonishingly rich, okay? But down the road, all those canyons had fallen down because the people who live in them are astonishingly poor. If you're poor, disasters kill you, whether you live in Grenfell Towers or you live in Haiti. If you're rich, you survive them. So the fundamental issue to be talking about is that. And the fundamental issue is how do we transfer cash when we go into these situations directly? And then we avoid Me Too, the sexual abuse scandals, all of those get avoided.
Okay, over.
Hello, mine is not really a question here, but it's an observation that I've made. I'm Annie from Kenya. So when I was growing up, I really wanted to work with some NGO, help some people, you know, a child or people who are not very privileged. And then I became a journalist, and I tried to actually interrogate some of the works that some NGOs do. And let me tell you, what I found out made me not want to be an aid worker. Because it's, we're in a situation where we have big proposals, crazy allocations, but what trickles down to the people on the ground is so little, it's crazy. Like you're saying, we have some, I'm not trying to trash what the aid workers do, but we, as journalists, we need to find a way of working around this. And for the stories that I've been doing, I really try so hard not to even quote reports from UNICEF and the likes of the UN. If I can get a report done by a local researcher, I'll actually go for it.
Wonderful. That's
because I found that most of these things is an exaggeration to just get funding for things that are actually non-existent or for projects that they will never execute. So for me as a journalist, I've really tried to work with local researchers and to address on the policies that we have in place so that we can correct some of these wrongs. So as a journalist, I think you really need to go on the ground, get to know what's happening, question some of these reports, ask questions. It's amazing when somebody comes to present to you a report and they don't even know anything about it. It was prepared somewhere in some fancy hotel in London or wherever, and they can't even, I mean, it's crazy. I'm so happy this topic came up. Thank you.
We've got another 5. Can I start it?
Camilla, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Hello.
Thank you. I completely agree. That's great.
I want to propose a topic that hasn't been discussed here yet, but in these areas you visit, and also Sally, about birth control. What do you say to those mothers who already have 5, 6, 10 kids on these areas? How do you orient them? I don't know if this is...
So the kind of my sort of 6 to 8 week intervention, I'm not rigid, I should say I'm trying more to include fathers, but I say mothers and babies because that's the language it's used, does include discussions on contraception. And I'm working with a wonderful MCH department now, and it's very interesting because it's a very ethnically mixed country, and we have Catholic, Mennonite, East Asian people of no religion and everything, and yet I watch the rural health nurses discuss contraception every day in the MCH clinics, and they do it incredibly tactfully by discussing its availability, and I'm learning from them. So it's available, but you're not saying it should happen, because some people don't want it. And so what you want to do is educate mothers as to the possibility that they don't have to have so many children, but you're not going to tell them, okay? That is obviously more difficult in countries where there's a lot of pressure from the men to have, and you'll find a story in the book of my translator on the Somali border thought that it was wonderful that his wife was on her 14th pregnancy, which is for me heartbreaking, because I'm pretty sure the wife wasn't happy. But I wasn't responsible. There was another agency doing. I'm not usually doing those programs, but usually I want to give women the information and let them choose. So it's information and education, not telling people what to do. And I don't want to give the impression that I'm against technical expertise. I'm all for technical expertise. It's how it's delivered and what the package is, the £400 a night hotel. There's another chapter there where I just talk about our different accommodation arrangements. I rant on, it's just extraordinary. I'm teaching volunteers sleeping on floors while I'm given an expensive hotel. And luckily we had a small revolution, and you'll see what happened about that. But there's something wrong with that. There has to be something wrong.
So we have time for what, a few more questions?
We've got 5 more, yeah.
Okay, go ahead, in the back.
Okay. Before I make my comment on the the activities of aid workers and development agencies, I just want to say this: developed countries have the right to protect their borders, and I believe that what developing countries should do, or what developed countries should do, is to force leaders of developing countries to help their people. Because you find out that they have resources, but they are mismanaging the resources. Yeah. So, and like Nigeria, for example, you find out that the oil money is spent in Western countries. So if they can help them, let them spend the money in Nigeria and stop receiving this fund. If you look at the development aid that comes to Nigeria, it's less than 2% of the GDP. So it doesn't really make much impact. So I believe that countries should protect their borders and decide who comes in or who doesn't. But what they should do to help developing countries mostly is to ensure that the leaders of developing countries are doing what they are supposed to do. And the stolen fund should not be found anywhere in developed countries. And then coming to the issue of development and all that, I usually ask these questions because if you come to a country like Nigeria, development workers, and they are the highest paid. So if you are the highest paid and you are helping the poor people, I wonder the kind of solution you are providing to them. So you find out, but I don't cover them, but you find out that every day you see them in big hotels holding workshops every day. And the people they are holding workshops for, they are not there, the ordinary people. But they say that, I've asked this question severally. They said that it's tied to the conditions set by the funders. So I don't know when the funders are giving them the money, they give them conditions to only be holding workshops, organizing training upon training, the high-level training. They have different names of all these trainings and workshops and all of that, and they are just wasting resources. At the end of the day, they will generate reports and then circulate it around the world. So if it should be, it should be better done in a way that allow the people to solve their problems. I think that's the best way to address some of these challenges. I always use the example of the Nigerian Civil War. In eastern Nigeria, when the war ended, that was where the war was fought, okay? The place was blockaded, and there was this massive malnutrition. About up to 2 million women and children died as a result of hunger. But at the end of the war in 1970, there was no IDP camps, there was no intervention for the people. So they went back to their communities and started rebuilding. And if you go back to Nigeria, eastern Nigeria is the most developed part of Nigeria, and in terms of human capital development is the highest. Malnutrition, stunting is just about 16%, compared to the northern part of the Nigeria where stunting is about 50%, okay? The war did not take place in that place and all that. So I think that allowing the people to solve their problems using local solutions will help better than sitting in hotels, generating reports that they don't even appreciate. Because if you build those things, in cases where they provide boreholes and all that, when they leave, the people are not able to maintain the boreholes. It will only work for 6 months and it stops working. And then the people go back to the stream, as to depend on water source and all that. So the funders should also look into this and, look at the reports they generate and all that.
I just want to thank you and hope you'll light that up, what you've just said. It's really important. Thank you.
So one more question.
So I'd just like to add to the first part of your book that you mentioned. I'm from Greece and have been covering the refugee crisis and lived actually on Lesbos for 2 years. And it's exactly as you said it. There was a beach. It was beautiful. There was fresh fish. So lots of aid workers came from Western Europe, and the decisions were not taken with refugees. Refugees weren't asked what they need or what they wanted. Often the local population didn't participate and is still not participating in decision making. And the UNHCR really didn't know how to navigate in what is considered a developed country that Greece is supposed to be.
Can I quickly comment? I think Greece is a very interesting situation. I was in Lesbos too. What Greece taught me is to value the young unpaid volunteer, because I think there's a big distinction, for great respect if anybody's here from IRC, between the behaviour of IRC and UNHCR, which came late, and the volunteers who basically came from all over the world, worked for nothing, and I was in a village where we had Greeks, volunteers, Japanese fishermen, I don't know what, just going out and getting the boats. And then when the big agencies came in, they said, go home, we're not needed anymore. It was extraordinary behavior, and yet the best psychosocial work and the best community development was done by a combination of refugees and unpaid volunteers together. And that's going on in Athens at the moment. It's very interesting. It'd be nice to talk about it more.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Lynn. And I think we're transitioning to the next part.
We are. So, Lynn, thank you. Wonderful. And Karen, we're going to take a break until about 5 to 3, so about 20 minutes break. I actually want to engage with one very important thing that Lynn said. When you were talking about activism and resisting the tenor of the time, my own view is that the best evidence-informed and most thoughtfully reported journalism is, in fact, and one of the most effective acts of resistance against the current of this time in many of our countries that we can do. And it's partially in that spirit that we've organized this gathering.
And thank you. Thank you for saying that. If I didn't make that, I'm so honored to talk to journalists, because that's what I meant. You are the resistance. What you write is the most important thing that can happen. So thank you, and thank you for your interest in this topic.